Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining me on today's CoolCare Masterclass, where we'll be looking at managing your Christmas payroll. Uh, as I'm sure you're all aware, CoolCare is here to make operating your care home easier, more efficient, and more profitable. And of course, today we'll be looking at a little bit of all three, hopefully. We're looking at the payroll side of things, specifically looking at Christmas payroll. As we are using Zoom today, if anyone does have any questions, you can use the Q&A option on our webinar to ask us any questions as we're going through. Anything you think of at all, don't be afraid to ask. Just go to the Q&A option on your Zoom webinar, and you can answer a question. A member of our team will be on hand to answer anything. And we will have some time at the end of the session once we've gone through everything that we need to, for you to answer any further questions. You can stick around at the end and ask us any other questions you might have. But anything you think of as we're going through, we will do our best to answer any and all questions that you have. So today we're looking at payroll, specifically kind of around the festive period, which can be quite a challenge for some people, with it being can be a bit of an odd one and different to your regular run. But this will help. We're just going to show you a few tips to help making this process a little bit easier and ensure that Christmas payroll is good for everyone in time we need it. So we're looking at monitoring, amending our timesheets to ensure hours are accurate for everyone, as well as adding stuff onto the timesheet manually in case we have to run payroll in advance and how we can do that. And comparing our rotas and timesheets to ensure those hours that we're adding on are correct and accurately reflecting what our staff would be doing, and how to then actually run that payroll and running all different reports we can run to keep an eye on this, ensure everything is accurate, reflecting what we're doing. So I'm going to stop over to my demo system to get things underway. Of course, all the data you're seeing here is all just made up for demonstration purposes on my demo system. So I'm going to stop over to that and we'll get things underway. So if I share my screen there, we should all see CoolCare on that. So the first thing you need to know about payroll in CoolCare, as I'm sure you might already know if you're already running it, the main thing that controls it all comes all the way from your staff clocking. Staff members clocking in and out, putting their hours onto timesheets, and those timesheet hours are what goes over to your payroll. So the best way to monitor that to ensure that everything is going to be correct in the end is actually right at the very beginning on CoolCare here on your dashboard with this little widget here, staff on shift. This widget here, staff on shift, tells you about any staff members that are currently clocked in at the moment with your clocking machine. As well as that, if you have a rota on CoolCare, it will tell you if they should be clocked in as well, if they're expected to be here or not. So I can see you've got some staff members clocked in for today on mine. Those with the green tick mean they're clocked in, they're on my rota, they're all good. So they're doing a shift we expect them to do. This one with the red cross, however, means they're clocked in but not rotated in. Now, if we have a look a little closer, we can see what's happened to this person and see if we need to make any corrections. So if we look at this person here, it says that they are one of my night staff that did clock in at the start of their shift last night, but has apparently been clocked in for over 17 hours now. And you can see the red cross showing me they shouldn't be here according to my rota. So there's two options there. Either the staff member's fallen asleep somewhere and we need to find them, wake them up, get them out of here. Or alternatively, they've just forgotten to clock out at the end of their shift. And so we can fix that for them with a manual clock. So if you click them from the widgets, it'll take me straight to their staff record. And we can then go to either their I button or biometric settings, depending on which of our clocking machines you use. We can add in a saying just when it should have clocked out properly, reflects on our timesheets correctly for them. So I click the button there. And we can add in a manual clock. You can do these as far back as a week, so you can easily do them retroactively on here. But in this case, it should have been today's dates at 7 a.m. at my home. So if I then save that manual clock will get added onto here. You'll start off as processing, and then once it does process, which can take up to 2 minutes if you want to wear, that will then process and that will then feed through to our timesheet and everywhere else. And that means, the next time this staff member comes to clock in, they're actually clocking in rather than, clocking out from this shift that started last night. And that way the clocks will be kept correct in the right direction, the timesheet's going to be fine for them, and the hours are going to be good at the end of the day when we look at it from the payroll side of things. So as I say, the clocking here really is the main thing that kind of runs the payroll in the end of the day, because it all kind of carries over from there. So as long as people are clocking in and out correctly, ideally, your timesheet should be all correct. and then your payroll will be all good from there. So that's a good thing to monitor on there. Let's say that dashboard widget there, staff on shift, and now that it's clocked down, you can see it disappears from there. No longer got that red cross. So as soon as you log into CoolCare, you can easily see if there's any issues with staff clocking directly from there and fix them nice and easily with a manual clock. And all those clocks, as I say, will go onto our timesheets, where all your staff hours go. When staff members clock in and out, their hours will go onto here. And again, in a perfect world, when the staff members clock correctly, these hours on here will show as these blue shifts. These blue ones here being snap to shift. Now, CoolCare could be set up to recognize what shifts your staff members would do. As long as they clock in and out around the right times, it will then go, oh, that's a good shift. That's fine. We know the hours for that, what it should be. That's the hours they're going to get. So even if they do clock in a little bit early before the shift begins, say at 10 to 7, where their shift begins at 7 a.m., and clock in a little bit after it ends as well, after, you can see, even if they clock in and out around those times, the CoolCare recognizes, oh, they're meant to be doing a 7x7 shift. That's a 12-hour shift in there. That's the number of hours you're going to be getting. And as well as that, on top of it, it can also then say, well, you've done a 12-hour shift, so that would also deduct a 1-hour break, which is how, in my case, they're then left with 11 standard hours at the top. So as long as people clock in and out, do the right shift you expect them to do, it will take off any breaks that have been set up for them as well and go, that's the number of hours you've got. That's the number of hours that goes over to payroll. So again, the importance of clocking in and out correctly comes across on there and will show on here as well. But of course, if they don't clock in and out correctly, they can show as orange on here, not snap to shift. Where in this case, if I click on this one, the staff member has clocked in at the right time, about 5 minutes before the shift begins, but they've clocked out an hour later, so they stayed on, might have done an extra hour in there to help out around the home. But that means there, where it's not snap to shift, it's also not deducted their break in my case here. So while they did technically do 12 hours in that sense, they were here for 13 hours, but they still should have a 1-hour break deducted, or that extra 1 hour they did might even count as extra hours in here as well. So we can just adjust these hours. So the regular shift was the 11 standard hours they did, the 12 hours minus the 1-hour break. We can also add in 1 extra hour on there to say they did an hour's overtime, which might get paid differently depending on how you set it up. And one thing I do recommend is as we're changing a shift on here, updating the hours, is to add in a little note, say what's been changed, why we've done that, so everyone's got visibility on what's happening on those. So I'm going to just say, stayed an hour points, updated hours for overtime. Something like that. Just so we know what we've done and we know why it's been changed on there. And always pop your initials on the end so we know who's made that change as well, if you'd like. We can save that. That will update our hours and turn our shift pink. The shift being pink just means that someone's changed it, so we know that someone has updated that. And it even puts a little E next to it, so we know we've got some extra hours on there as well. Yeah, you can easily spot where people are updating things on the timesheets, and I say keeping up to date with those changes as they happen. As I say, that's the basics of using the timesheet there, but the main thing that's the kind of difference that we're going to be showing you is for Christmas time, where you might be running time payroll on a different day than you would normally. You might need to run payroll a little bit in advance. So, you'd need to add in some hours for shifts that haven't been worked yet by staff members. Luckily, your timesheet can do that. While you can't obviously manually clock someone in the future, and they can't clock in and out themselves in the future, we can instead add the hours onto the timesheet directly. And one way to help with that is first knowing what shifts your staff are going to be doing. And luckily, that's where our rota comes in handy, or at least our option to compare to the rota. If you have a rota set up in CoolCare, this button will appear in your timesheets to be able to compare the timesheet to the rota. If I click that, it pops these little exclamation marks on here. And these exclamation marks means there's a difference between a timesheet and the rota. It's normally used to say where you've got a shift that hasn't been done by a staff member, or an extra shift that's done that wasn't rotated in. Like for example, this one here, this night shift from yesterday, wasn't rotated in, so it's showing me that's different on there. But we can also see where all the rota shifts are planned that haven't been done yet, because obviously we're not on those days. So I can easily spot where I would need to add hours onto my timesheet in order to run my payroll in advance on there. So simply by then clicking on a date, where the exclamation marks have highlighted where there's a shift on the rota that should be on the timesheet, and even hover over it, you can see the full detail. If I then click onto that, I can bring up essentially a blank 0 hour shift to add in the hours manually. I can see there the rota shift assigned at the bottom there, telling me what position the shift times and the shift hours are on there. And I can then use that as a basis for how many hours I would give them on the timesheet here. Essentially adding in their standard hours, which I'm going to pop in as 11, since again, for my home here, I've got a 12-hour shift minus a 1 hour break. So 11 standard hours would be what they would be getting. I can then save that in here, and now we'll add it onto the rotor as a pink shift because it's been manually added on rather than coming from a clock. And you can do that as much as you need to, seeing all the gaps you've got on the rotor that we need to do in advance. We can add them onto here, pop them on there, save it, and that adds them in. So we can fill up essentially where we're expecting our shifts to be done by staff, adding them in advance, so that then we can run them on the payroll side of things. So I'm going to actually fill up, we'll do them all this week, why not? So add them all in there, and then we can see how those hours appear. Yeah, just a little note, you can see the exclamation marks don't disappear after the shifts have been added in. So they will remain there so we kind of know what we added in from the rotor, essentially. That's, we can pop them all in there. Yeah, and you can essentially go as far as you want because with the with the timesheet here, you're not limited to just 1 week. I could click on my date at the top there, go forward to next week, see that it's currently empty, but oh, have I not got my rotor to look at in there? Wait 1 second, let me try that again. Apparently it's not there for me for some reason. Let's try different dates. Yes, essentially you could go as far as you want, and where the rotor might be empty, where there's no hours yet, you can use this include staff with empty timesheets and essentially pull up all your staff members to add in the rotor's shifts as you need to. You can add hours manually onto the rotor as far ahead as you want on there, and we'll get them all into here, just like that. As well as that, as an extra thing, if you did want to, kind of as an extra confirmation, if you didn't want all that pink on the timesheet here, they can also be authorized with an extra tick box there. Certain people have access to do that, depending on your permissions, and that will just turn it green on there. So you kind of know that's definitely confirmed that's all good on that. That's the idea. I say we're adding in those shifts in advance where you might need them, pop them on the timesheets, and then that means you can run the payroll in advance as well. And there's an extra bonus with that as well. When once the staff members then start clocking in out, because obviously they're going to then clock in and out on those days where they're actually working, the hours that they clock in and out will then override the hours on a timesheet. So you'll, at the end of the day, once the staff members have done the shifts, you'll be left with the actual hours of the shift they've worked, and the clock times will be in there. That it's not going to add it on top of it, so you're not going to see like 22-hour shifts in there. It will still be the regular shifts hours based on when they've clocked it in and out because it overrides it rather than adding it on top. But that's so yeah, it's all going to kind of work out in the end, and it's not going to have anything messed up by doing that in advance. It'll all be good at the end of the day. And again, you're getting it all on the timesheet here means you can then run it out on the payroll side of things, which we're going to find if I go to my payroll page. There's plenty of ways to report on this. Get it out of CoolCare, of course, using your payroll tab on there. So I'm just going to actually use it for just this week we're on, just to show you as an example. Since those are the hours I've put in, we can see them all in one go. The 14th. You can run payroll for whatever dates you like, obviously. So again, you can run that in advance if you need to, as I'm doing up to the end of this week. And I can then run these different reports to see those hours in different ways. Again, just as a kind of check before we actually send it over to payroll, for example. So this view report's the best one to use for that. It will show you a nice breakdown of hours for each staff member one by one as a PDF, as you can see. So if I scroll down, we should find some staff members that have some hours in here in a moment. There we are as an example. We've got a couple on here. I'm just going to zoom in slightly, actually. You can see each staff member that have had the hours within the pay dates you've chosen, some basic details for them on there, and then a breakdown of their hours and pay set up in the system. Again, my pay rates are set up on my system here, so obviously you'll be set up for your system as well, or however you run payroll. It might be slightly different on there, but it will have the hours and pay details in there, so you can kind of check it all, make sure it all adds up and makes sense based on just the hours you've put into timesheets. You can see it's all on there. Yeah. And the good thing to do is, is to actually take this information and then download it from CoolCare. So once you've kind of put all the manual stuff on the timesheets, download this as a point of reference, and that way you can use it as a point of comparison once the staff have actually done the hours to compare back to it on there. Yes, and yes, as someone's just asked there, just to confirm, yes. When future hours have been added onto the timesheets, the next clocking will then overwrite the manual entries on the timesheets. So essentially, once someone clocks in and out and does their shift on a day where you already had that manual entry, it will just replace it with the actual hours they've worked rather than adding it on top of them, which is why it's important on here to then keep a copy of kind of those timesheet hours in the form of this report here, or other reports we do have available as well. But this one's kind of a good way of seeing essentially their hours worked for, or I guess the hours you've put in for them manually, to then be able to compare against their actual worked hours once they've done the shifts after the fact, if you need to compare back to it. Yeah, that's what this report's be useful for. And like I can say you can download this to your computer or even print off a paper copy if you prefer. But there are additional reports on this page which can also be used for that kind of thing. For example, this one here, the export payroll data. This one being the same information, just in an Excel spreadsheet instead, if you prefer it in a different formats. Show me each staff member, their hours and shifts, or their hours, I should say, and pay from there. And this is kind of an alternative option instead of using a timesheet. If you didn't want to add the hours onto the timesheet manually one by one, you can instead use this report here, essentially manipulating it in Excel to update the hours and totals in there to reflect, what the staff members plan, are going to be working based on what you've got in the rota hours on there. So instead of messing around on the timesheet, you could just take this spreadsheet and, manually manipulate it to reflect the worked hours that you expect the staff to do. But it does require a bit more because you have to then work out both the hours and the totals on there. CoolCare won't automatically update these. They're not Excel formulas or anything. It's just something you have to add in manually yourself. So if you didn't want to do stuff on the timesheets, you could use the payroll reports instead. And then that could be obviously sent off to whoever runs your payroll and deals with it to manage the rest on there. So it's additional option on there if you prefer. But another report on here that you might find useful as a kind of point of comparison is this export timesheet data. This one will be better for after the fact to see kind of what the staff members have actually worked, because it will show you a list of essentially all the shifts on the timesheet here from the dates you've selected, and it will tell you there when they've clocked in and out on there. More importantly, tell you if the shifts have been manually changed, if they're snapped to shift on there as well. So that way you can kind of spot what do we call it? You can spot where they're manual shifts versus the actual clocked shifts that staff members have done, mainly based on the clock times there. Essentially, if they're the manual ones, they would be clocking in and out there. Well, they don't clock in and out those, so it just puts them as midnight to midnight, essentially, on that. But of course, the hours will reflect what you've put in the timesheet for them. And it even says there that they've been manually changed. So you can use this to compare, again, kind of once the staff members have done the shifts, to make sure all the shifts are actually showing the clock in and out times on there, make sure there's no manual ones left after the shifts have been worked. And it's also good just to see, when staff members are clocking in and out, and good to kind of see each shift individually if you need to check anything from them. A quick double check you can find in there. So yeah, a few reports in this payroll page that are useful to see those hours from there, gather them all together if you need to see them all in one place. And like I say, if you didn't want to do stuff on the timesheet, that export payroll data is another way to kind of manipulate payroll and get the data out of the system as you wish. But there are a couple extra reports that you might find useful on top of that as well in your staff reports page. Again, looking at staff hours and stuff in here, in these staff hours and timesheet reports, there's plenty of ones to look at in here, but a good ones to specifically see would be the timesheet totals. Again, this one's more useful for after the fact to see if I click on putting my dates on here again. This is either a PDF or a CSV, you get the option on there. I just want to give you some total hours from the timesheets for whatever dates you've chosen, the staff members that have worked within those dates. And the big thing this one does is it'll have their contracted hours for the dates you've chosen versus their worked hours and any other hours they may have done, giving you then their total hours versus their contracted hours. So you can see over under if the staff members have worked above or below their contracted hours, you can easily spot it in there from that point of view. And again, that's useful for, you say, either the manual hours you've put in or for when they're clocking in and out. It's useful on there as well. Or just to use reports in general, I find. And the other thing you can do with these reports here is compare your rota versus your timesheets. A couple of reports with that. You've got this one here, plan versus timesheets, which gives me, again, you can choose whatever dates you like. I do it for just, this one you can't do for future dates, but I can do it for whatever dates I want. I'll do it for all this month so far, for example. And it will give you the planned hours from your rota versus the worked hours from your timesheets in there, comparing the two against each other. So we can see where we've got stuff either over or under budgets on your timesheet, in my case, under budgets on mine there. But it will also give you a breakdown then of variances by each department and even a full breakdown of each position day by day in there, the hours from that. So that's quite a detailed report you can see with a lot of stuff in there going into it in terms of seeing worked versus planned rota hours. What's another one you might find useful as well is the staff hours analysis. This one being, again, you can choose it for whatever dates you like. Can't do it in the future though. Well, that's this one being a nice big Excel report comparing not just your rota and your timesheets, but also your budget. The budget being from the rota setup, that initial perfect version of rota to say this is what my hours should look like ideally, versus then what's actually been planned in on the rota, versus then what was actually worked on the timesheets. So you can see again where we're over, under in different ways, comparing that for your staff hours in there. And it even breaks it down based on each department. You can see down at the bottom on there. So yeah, plenty of ways of seeing hours versus rotas and hours in general for your staff. You can easily keep on top of all of that in different ways, however you might need it in the reporting options there. But yes, all of that coming together should hopefully assist with your payroll at any time of year, not just Christmas, of course. Well, but it will all come together on here. So, and with that, that's kind of everything to show you all Sage Masterclass. Hopefully that's been useful and will be helpful for your payroll around the holiday season. But if you do want additional help, or for example, say additional training on CoolCare, you may be entitled to some free of charge training sessions, which we can book in with our team if you'd like for covering whatever you'd want on CoolCare. We can assist you on that. You can email us training@coolcare.co.uk or phone us, of course, as well. Or if you need additional help on CoolCare, you can just get in touch with our support team for assistance using CoolCare. And if you might need, you can call them, email them, or use the live chat within CoolCare itself. Or you can get in touch with our customer success team for anything queries regarding your actual CoolCare subscription and accounts. Anything else you might need in there. But all I have to say for today then is thank you all for joining me. And the next time I'll see you all for our next webinar will be in the new year. Yes, and I'll be looking at the staff portal side of things. So yes, I hope you've enjoyed today's masterclass and for the entire year. It's been a lot we've done over this year, and we'll see you again in the new year for plenty more. So thank you all for joining. Like I say, we'll stick around for a few more minutes if anyone does have any more questions. But otherwise, thank you for joining and have a nice rest of your day.